Hello and welcome again to 10 Things About Writing. Today I'm going to talk about something that makes a lot of writers a bit uncomfortable, which is money. So, money is something that writers feel very reluctant to discuss in the context of their work, and it's understandable because you put more than just time and effort into writing fiction. Very often you put bits of your soul. And this is where the problem starts, because how much is your soul worth? Not a lot, it turns out, in a lot of cases. And we need to talk about this because if we don't, nothing will change. Now, the creative industries in my country are phenomenally wealthy. Lots of people get rich over creative work, whether that is art or theatre or film or TV or books. Behind all those things, there are creators. And unfortunately, the creators don't get paid as much as everybody else does. And this is one of the mysteries that has dogged the creative industries for a long time. And it's partly because creators don't like to be monetized. They don't like to be thought of as people who make a product that can then be sold. And I can get that. It is an uncomfortable thing. On the other hand, not eating is also an uncomfortable thing. And we need to balance those two discomforts and try to find a solution. Now, I'm going to mostly talk about writing novels because that's what I do. But it applies in different ways to creators of all disciplines. And one of the mysteries is how much people are actually earning. Now, writers don't talk to each other much about this, which is understandable because we're all slightly paranoid. We are all slightly worried about whether somebody else is earning more than we are or less than we are. And this is why we have organisations like the Society of Authors who are there to basically do polls and find out anonymously about their members and find out exactly where the money is and where it's going. Turns out it seems mostly to be going to publishers and agents and film companies, and the people who use IP, that is intellectual property, the thing that we have created, to make money. The thing is, a lot of that money doesn't trickle down to the creator themselves. The last poll showed that the average full-time writer earns about £11,000 a year, which is thoroughly disgraceful, far less than the minimum wage. And this is a problem for a lot of things, a lot of people, because it's not just a problem for the writers themselves who aren't earning very much money. It's also a problem for the people who want to write and who actually won't be able to afford to do it, who won't be able to afford to make a living even though their creation is worth something, because the money will not come to them. And we have a situation here where a lot of people who are writing, and a lot of writers you've heard of, whose books are there on the shelves in the bookshops that you may have read, are not full-time writers because they just can't afford to be. Instead, they are journalists, they're teachers, they're maybe teaching creative writing classes, they are doing other things that pay the bills, and their writing is the bit on the side that they love doing, and they do through joy and all the other things we talked about, but which isn't generating enough regular income for them to live on that alone. For 15 years, I was a teacher. I wrote in my spare time. I had 3 books published during that time, so I wasn't simply amusing myself. I was working in a kind of professional context, but I wasn't earning enough money to do it as a full-time job. And a lot of writers are in this position for all of their lives. They never hit the moment at which they can actually break through into being able to afford to work full-time as a writer. Now, what's the problem with this, you ask? Well, there are a number of problems. One, creating stuff, whether you are writing or whether you're an illustrator or a poet, can and should be potentially a full-time job. There are very few jobs in the world where, for the privilege of doing that job, you have to have another job. So, yes, there are people who should be working full-time in this industry, and other people who should be allowed entry into this industry. And here we're talking about niche writers, marginalised writers, the kind of diverse voices we really need to be hearing. Those people take one look at the situation as it is and they go, well, no, you've got to have an independent income from either a second job or a partner who has a well-paid job who can support your writing. Not everybody has that. It's a privilege to be able to write in this situation, and that's a problem, because we would like, as an industry, to see an awful lot more voices being heard, and obviously if they're not being paid enough, then they won't be heard because they won't enter the trade in the first place. Now, I can hear some of you asking, because it's something that I get told all the time online, why do you expect to be given money if what you're doing isn't really worth anything? Well, it is, of course, it is. All the writing that we see is worth enormous amounts to other people. Other people make money out of our writing. I'll give you just one example. Look at festivals. For many years I've been banging on about festivals because literary festivals are now big business. When I started off 30 odd years ago, they weren't really. They were a kind of a small enterprise, but over 30 years literary festivals have become huge. The Hay Festival, for instance, is now so enormous that it is international. It has branches all over the place. It's a big business. It generates huge amounts of money. Very little of that money goes to the people who actually form the backbone of a literary festival, which is the writers of the literature that the public come to see in the first place. And this has been a weird anomaly for many years, and I've been campaigning as part of the Society of Authors to try and get this anomaly overturned, because a literary festival sees no problem in paying for the venues that it hires, the cars that it uses, the overnight accommodation, the food, the flowers. But until very recently, they have not been paying any of the contributors, except the occasional very special person. So celebrities, politicians, people who actually won't get out of bed unless they're paid a significant amount of money. And jobbing authors were expected to come and perform for love, or for exposure, which is a deadly word which is used all the time for us, as if we needed to be given a platform. And yes, some people do need to be given a platform, and it has become a kind of blackmail for those people. Come, be out of pocket to attend our festival. We will sell tickets at $10 a pop for the public, but you won't get anything. You might get some sandwiches in the green room, but you will get exposure, and that is enough. Unfortunately, it's not enough. A lot of people cannot actually afford to be out of pocket and to give up a day's work or 2 days if they have to stay overnight somewhere, pay their own rail fare, pay their overnight accommodation, effectively pay to play. So what you're getting is this kind of two-tier system. People like me who can actually afford to work for nothing, although I will not, because I am aware that if I accept to work for nothing, then it's much more difficult for the second person down the line to actually ask to be paid. And I would like everybody to have the same chance. But people who can't afford to do that just won't go to certain festivals. And so you will have only privileged people attending festivals, and the people who are on a tighter budget, they won't get there. And this is bad for them, but it's also bad for the audience who wants diversity, who would like something other than just the usual suspects at the same old festivals again and again. And so this problem trickles down to the readership as well as just the community of writers, and it's important to understand this. Now, people often ask me where money comes from for authors, and the answer is it comes from all kinds of places. But in my part of the business, which is writing novels, there is a system based on advances, which you'll have heard of, and royalties. Now, one of the reasons that this is a kind of mystery to people is that you don't know how much anybody else is getting for their advance. The industry is very secretive about it. Agents are very secretive about it. Authors are also very secretive about it. And so when you read about an advance, in the bookseller, for instance, or sometimes in the tabloid press, if they get hold of some news about some big signing, You will hear about 3-figure advances, 6-figure advances, or whatever. But people tend to be a bit kind of wary of giving actual figures. And this is because an advance is as long as a piece of string. It can be anything. It is a sum paid to an author based on somebody's idea of how many copies your book will sell. Some advances are very small. Some are very large. Much more of them are very small than the very large ones, but you will hear more about the very large ones because they tend to be big news. Now, to give you a kind of context, my first advance was £2,000 for world rights, and that was it. I never got anything else for that book because it didn't sell enough copies to pay out £2,000. And this is not unusual even now. Actually, even though that was 30 years ago, advances for authors have not generally gone up. In fact, they have mostly gone down, and authors' earnings have mostly gone down, and there's a reason for that, which I'll get into. So yeah, your advance is based on an idea of how many sales you'll get. So imagine you have a deal, a 2-book deal with your current publisher for, let's say, 100 grand. Now that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? And it is pretty good. It would be a very good advance now in the context of what people get. On the other hand, it is not free money. It's not like winning the lottery and you get your 100 grand all at once. It's not like that. It is paid to you over a period of time. One part of it is paid to you on delivery of your book. And remember, this is for a 2-book deal, so there are going to be 2 books involved. Then another one on publication of the book. Then on publication of the paperback of the book. And then there'll be the second book, the delivery of the second book, and then hardback publication of that and paperback publication of that. And so your 6-figure deal, your 100 grand, is going to be cut into sections and fed to you over a period of time. And how long that period of time will be is very much dependent on how long it will take you to write the second book. So it could be, I would think, arguably 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, maybe even longer. It really does depend on what kind of book it is, what genre it's in, what kind of publisher you're with. But it's not 100 grand, of course. Some of it will go to the taxman. Some of it will go to your agent. And so, it is not the wonderful windfall that it sounds when you first hear about £100,000 advance. So there is that. And now there's the business of royalties. Now, advances are based putatively on an idea of royalties, and advances have to be paid back effectively from the royalties of the books you sell. Now, royalties have gone down a lot for authors because in the old days it was a very simple system. You basically got a certain percentage of the price of the book, and the price of the book was the same wherever you bought it. So if a book was $12.99 in Tesco's, it was also $12.99 in Waterstones. Nowadays that's not quite true. Books are priced in all kinds of funny ways. And so your royalties will vary depending on whether you bought it at full price at an independent bookstore, or whether you got it for buy one, get one free somewhere, or whether you got it in a pound shop for £1. So it will be a percentage. If your royalty is 10% of the sale price, obviously if you bought it in a pound shop for 99p, you will get pennies. If you bought it full price in an independent shop, then you would get maybe £1, £1.50, depending on the price of the book. The reason people now no longer really believe in royalties is that heavy discounting has more or less made it impossible to pay back large advances. And so royalties for many people are a bit of a thing of the past. So this is why most agents try to get as big an advance as they possibly can, because knowing that very often royalties will just never add up to the price of your advance. And that's probably one of the reasons that authors are being paid less effectively now than they were, because in the old days, you paid back your advance with a decent run of sales, and then you lived on the royalties. Now you don't really live on the royalties, and there is no real expectation of getting much in terms of royalties, and so you have to keep writing books and producing books because the advance is most of the time all you are likely to get. And that's why it's important for authors to understand that, well, A, it's not a well-paid job, and B, it is important for them to stick up for their rights. It's important for them not to say yes to people who want them to work for free, because, as I've explained, authors don't earn that much anyway, and the perception of how much authors earn is so much greater than the reality of what they earn, that people are constantly asking them to work for free, to come to festivals for free, to just look over a manuscript for free, to just write a piece for this magazine for free. And people feel, a lot of younger authors and emerging authors particularly, feel that they are obliged to do this, partly because of that terrible word exposure that I was talking about before, and partly because they think that everybody else is doing it as well, and therefore if they don't, they'll come across as stroppy and they'll be left out and they will miss opportunities, and that's not true. It's really very important for authors to stick together. This is one of the reasons I'm no longer doing any festivals that don't pay every one of their contributors. It's important to think about the small names as well as the big names, because if you are wanting to support the cause of literacy as a whole, it is important to understand that it's not just about the big hitters, it's also about the people who are coming up through the ranks, who are going to be the next big hitters if you give them a chance. So if you are a writer and you are being asked to work for free, always ask yourself this. I'm not telling you not to do it, because it's always going to be your choice. But ask yourself this: what's in it for you? It is okay to say no to something if there is nothing in it for you. And it is also essential, I think, that writers support each other. I'll be back next week with something different. Until then, have a good day. Bye-bye.